Dive right in and enjoy.
In the midst of the chaos, an elder from the gathered crowd gasped in horror, his voice trembling as he realized the gravity of what had just unfolded. His eyes were locked on Yoil Ryan, whose hands had just committed an act that seemed beyond redemption. The elder's panicked expression mirrored the shock and disbelief of those around him. Yoil Ryan, her face stained with tears, stood defiantly in the face of their judgment. Her expression twisted with both anguish and resolve, her body trembling not with fear, but with the weight of her emotions. She gazed upon the barely conscious Yeon-hee, whom she had wronged, her eyes burning with a dark and dangerous determination. The flames of vengeance seemed to flicker within her, undeterred by the consequences that everyone around her feared. With a trembling hand, she reached beneath her sleeve and revealed a hidden blade, the cold metal gleaming faintly in the light. Though her voice did not rise, her thoughts were loud enough for everyone to feel her hatred. She was not afraid of punishment or death. In her heart, nothing mattered more than avenging Mak In-hoo, the one she had lost. Yoil Ryan's eyes shone with the bitter regret of being unable to do more, to exact further retribution for the wrongs that had fueled her rage. But her regret went deeper than that. Her hatred extended to the Tang family's young lord, whose existence was a bitter reminder of her unfinished vengeance. It pained her that she wouldn't witness his downfall, that she could not take her revenge to its fullest extent. Her fingers tightened around the knife, its blade poised to end her own life. She was ready to make the final sacrifice, to escape the hands of justice and give herself fully to her cause. She raised the blade to her neck, her decision final. In that very moment, a blur of motion shattered her resolve. Yeon-Myeong, swift as the wind, moved with incredible speed. His blade flashed in an instant, severing Yoil Ryan's wrist before she could complete her act of self-destruction. The knife fell from her grip, clattering to the ground as blood sprayed from her wounded wrist. Yoil Ryan's attempt at suicide had been thwarted with ruthless precision. At the same time, his attention shifted to the flames that had engulfed Yeon-hee, the young woman whose life hung by a thread. Without hesitation, Yeon-Myeong extended his hand, drawing the raging fire away from her body and absorbing it into himself. Yeon-Myeong stood before Yoil Ryan, his chest heaving with the remnants of anger that still burned within him. His face, usually calm and composed, was now shadowed with a grim expression as he looked down at the woman who had brought chaos into the arena. His voice, though restrained, carried the weight of his fury. The scene before him, an innocent life nearly lost and the dishonor Yoil Ryan had inflicted, was a violation of more than just lives. It was a betrayal of the pride and sacrifice of those who had once fought with dignity. Yoil Ryan's actions weren't just an attack on Yeon-hee. They had sullied the memory of a swordsman who had fought with honor, trampling on the legacy of someone who, despite being an opponent, had deserved respect even in the face of death. Yeon-Myeong felt a deep sense of disgust, realizing that she had not only taken her vengeance too far, but had twisted it into something vile. His resolve hardened as he stood over her, silently vowing that she would not find peace, not after what she had done. Yet, even as his rage simmered, he understood that her fate was no longer his to decide. The Lord would pass judgment in due time, and he knew he had to contain the situation before it spiraled further out of control. Yoil Ryan, her failed attempt at suicide leaving her wounded and humiliated, gritted her teeth in defiance. Blood still dripped from her severed wrist, yet her eyes burned with a dark triumph. She sneered at Yeon-Myeong, mocking him even in her weakened state. To her, his efforts were futile. She believed with all her heart that no matter what he did, her lord would exact vengeance this very day, and the young lord of the Tang family would die by her lord's hand. There was no room for doubt in her voice, only a twisted sense of victory, as if she had already won. But Yeon-Myeong remains unshaken, his composure now fully restored. The grim resolve in his eyes reflected his thoughts. Though her words were nothing more than venomous taunts, he would not allow them to provoke him. If anything, it only solidified his intent to silence her. The tension in the air thickened, but before either of them could act, a sudden light erupted in the center of the arena. The brilliance of it was blinding, cutting through the atmosphere of impending violence. All eyes turned toward the source, their expressions filled with shock and disbelief. Even Yeon-Myeong, Mirio, and Yeonjeong were unable to hide their astonishment as the figure emerged from the light. It was Yugiljan, the Lord of the Black Death Alliance. His presence alone commanded attention, his aura exuding a sense of authority and danger that sent a chill through the gathered crowd. The battle that had seemed moments away from escalating was now held in a stunned silence. As all those present tried to grasp the significance of this unexpected arrival, the very air around them seemed to change, as if the arena had shifted into the domain of something far more perilous. The moment Yoil Ryan laid eyes on Yugiljan, the lord she had so desperately awaited, a surge of excitement coursed through her. The desperation and mockery that had filled her voice earlier now gave way to elation. Her bloodied form trembled with the thrill of his presence, her eyes wide with admiration and relief. For Yoil Ryan, this was the moment she had been waiting for, her faith in her lord unwavering even in the face of her own suffering. Yugiljan, however, paid her no mind. His gaze swept across the arena, falling on the lifeless forms of his daughter, Yeonhee, and his sworn brother, Myeong-il. His expression darkened, though he remained silent. The devastation before him told a story of betrayal and loss that needed no words. His wrath, unspoken yet palpable, filled the air, making it heavy with the weight of impending doom. His mere presence cast a shadow over the crowd, suffocating them with the cold realization that they stood in the midst of a power far beyond their comprehension. Yeon-Myeong, his heart pounding, observed the scene with growing anticipation. This was the Lord of the Black Death Alliance, the man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of his enemies and commanded absolute loyalty from his subordinates. Now, in the face of such wrath, it was clear why those who served him fought to the death. They had feared this moment more than death itself. From the sidelines, Mirio watched in disbelief. Her bewilderment was etched across her face as she struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. Yugiljan's presence was unlike anything she had ever encountered. He didn't seem like a mere human, but something far more dangerous, something that defied her understanding. His aura alone was enough to unnerve even the most seasoned of warriors. Yeon-Myeong, feeling the growing tension, cast a glance toward Mirio and Yeonjeong. He could sense that neither of them could withstand the overwhelming force emanating from Yugiljan. The sheer weight of his power pressed down on them, leaving them stunned and frozen in place. Determination set in as Yeon-Myeong tightened his grip on his sword. If it came to a fight, he would have to confront Yugiljan alone. He could not afford to let his guard down, not for a second. Yet, before Yeon-Myeong could even react, Yugiljan was already moving. The Lord passed by him with such fluidity that it left Yeon-Myeong momentarily stunned. It was as if time itself had bent to Yugiljan's will, allowing him to glide past without acknowledging the threat that Yeon-Myeong posed. In an instant, he was at his daughter's side, his movements so swift and deliberate that Yeon-Myeong hadn't even noticed when he had crossed the distance. Taken aback, Yeon-Myeong's mind raced. He couldn't fathom how someone could move with such speed, nor could he shake the unsettling realization that Yugiljan had completely disregarded his presence. The Lord of the Black Death Alliance had not seen him as an obstacle, not even worth acknowledging. And that, more than anything, left Yeon-Myeong unnerved. Yoil Ryan, desperate to twist the situation in her favor, shouted frantically toward Yugiljan. Her voice echoed in the tense arena, trembling with a mixture of desperation and malice. She pointed toward Yeon-Myeong, determined to frame him for the devastation around them, her words dripping with the venom of manipulation. The accusations she hurled were aimed to incite wrath, hoping to turn Yugiljan's anger toward the young lord of the Tang family. In her mind, this was the final push needed to set her lord on a path of vengeance. Yet Yugiljan remained unfazed by her cries. Her provocation fell on deaf ears. Without a single glance in her direction, he approached the dying Yeonhee, his daughter. His face was a mask of quiet sorrow as he knelt beside her, gently removing his robe and wrapping it around her fragile body. There was no hesitation in his movements, only a father's silent grief and duty. Lifting her in his arms with deliberate care, he turned away from the chaos of the arena, his back to Yoil Ryan, and began to leave without uttering a word. Yoil Ryan, seeing this, was struck by disbelief. Her pleading voice cracked as she called out to him, confusion and panic seeping into her tone. She could not understand why he was leaving, why he wasn't engaging in battle. To her, the enemy stood right in front of him, yet he was walking away. Her desperate pleas grew louder, more frantic, as she begged him to stay and fight, to fulfill the vengeance she believed was owed. But Yugiljin, still carrying his daughter, spoke only 4 words. Everything is meaningless. Those words sent a chill through the air. Yoil Ryan, stunned by his response, was left grasping at the unraveling threads of her plan. His departure felt like a betrayal to everything she had believed in, and her voice grew shrill as she tried once more to call him back. She screamed after him, her words filled with bitterness, insisting that their dead deserved retribution, that this was the moment for vengeance. But her desperation was met only with silence as Yugiljin continued walking, his focus solely on his daughter. Before Yoil Ryan could finish her frenzied outburst, her words were abruptly cut off. In one swift motion, Yeon-Myeong stepped forward and, with precise efficiency, knocked her unconscious. Her body crumpled to the ground, silencing her cries as the scene shifted from chaos to a somber calm. Yeon-Myeong's expression grew darker as he looked down at the unconscious form of Yoil Ryan, her earlier outburst still ringing in his mind. His patience, already frayed, had reached its breaking point. He had endured enough of her venomous words, and now silence was the only thing he demanded from her. With a grim determination, he resolved to put an end to her disruptions, tying her motionless body with a rope. His thoughts, however, were already elsewhere, racing through the gravity of the situation that had spiraled far beyond his initial plans. What had begun as a carefully orchestrated scheme had taken a sharp turn. The original plan was to create a distraction by drawing attention to himself at the Sichuan Assembly, hoping to eliminate key heirs while diverting the northern advance. With the joint sect busy fending off the demonic cult, the timing had seemed perfect. But the death of Yugiljan's daughter had shattered any semblance of strategy. This was no longer a mere calculated maneuver, it had become deeply personal. Vengeance, fueled by the loss of a loved one, now overshadowed any sense of reason. The delicate balance Yeon-Myeong had hoped to maintain was rapidly crumbling beneath the weight of an unforeseen vendetta. As he prepared to leave the arena behind with the unconscious Yoil Ryan in tow, Mirio stepped forward, her concern evident. She could sense the shift in his resolve and questioned his next steps. Was he truly planning to pursue the Lord of the Black Death Alliance, the man who had just walked away with the body of his dying daughter? Her voice carried a note of warning, knowing full well the dangerous path Yeon-Myeong was treading. Yeon-Myeong, however, remained calm, his demeanor steady despite the storm brewing around him. He understood the stakes. If he left now, the Tang family would be left vulnerable, exposed to the wrath of Yugiljan. There was no choice but to follow through, to see this situation to its conclusion. His words, firm and resolute, made it clear that he had no intention of backing down. He urged the others to return and wait, knowing that his path was now one he must walk alone. But Mirio wasn't willing to let him go so easily. She had felt the overwhelming presence of Yugiljan just moments before, a force so powerful that it had unsettled even the most seasoned fighters. The Black Death Alliance leader was a man of legend, known for his terrifying strength. Rumors claimed he had even overwhelmed Taewa Jinin, a warrior of unmatched skill. She couldn't fathom how Yeon-Myeong, despite his talents, could face such a figure alone. Yeon-Myeong's response, however, was unwavering. He wasn't going to confront the Lord of the Black Death Alliance with the intent to fight. He hoped that if there was any shred of reason left in Yugiljan, the Lord would listen to someone who came to speak, not to battle. But beneath his calm exterior, the reality of what could unfold wasn't lost on him. If the worst were to happen, if diplomacy failed, there would be no turning back. He would have to risk his life to protect the Tang family, for that was his duty as the young lord. The physician's voice trembled as he delivered the grievous news, his tone heavy with regret. He had done all he could, yet it hadn't been enough. The flames that had consumed Yeon-hee hadn't just scarred her body. They had pierced deep into her very being. Her already frail constitution had made her unable to withstand such an assault. As he finished speaking, sorrow filled the room, the weight of his words settling like an unbearable burden. Yugiljan stood there, silent, his mind swirling in memories of the past. The names of those he had lost, Yeon-hee, Myeong-il, and the leader, echoed painfully within him. He recalled the promise he had made so long ago, when his leader had entrusted him with raising Yeonhee as his own daughter, along with the responsibility of guiding the Black Death Alliance to prosperity. That promise had become the core of his existence, but now, it felt as though that core had been shattered. The pain of loss, something he thought he had long since mastered, resurfaced with a vengeance. He had believed that strength would shield him from this kind of agony. Over the years, he had trained tirelessly, pushing his sworn brothers to ascend to the fire realm, forging alliances with those drawn to his power. Together, they had become a force to be reckoned with, feared and respected across the martial world. But now, standing in the face of such personal tragedy, all of that power felt meaningless. Despite everything he had achieved, he couldn't protect the ones dearest to him. His strength had proven insufficient in the places where it mattered most. Darkness clouded Yugiljan's expression as he remembered a small moment from Yeonhee's childhood. The image of her weeping over a broken straw doll came to his mind. Back then, she had cried for hours, devastated by the loss of something so simple. Today, as he stood over her lifeless body, he felt the same unbearable grief that had consumed her then. The loss was far greater, the pain far deeper, and yet, he realized with bitter regret that he hadn't even been aware of her suffering. A raw, seething rage built inside him as his grief deepened. What was the point of regrets after loss? To him, they were useless, mere emotions that served no purpose. The only thing that mattered now was ensuring that such loss never occurred again. His body began to radiate a dark aura, his emotions stirring with violent intensity. Regret wouldn't bring Yeonhee back, but vengeance could prevent future tragedies. His resolve solidified, his expression hardening into one of grim determination. Everything and everyone that posed even the slightest threat to his people would be eradicated. The time for sentiment was over. In his heart, a singular, unshakable purpose took root. He would destroy anyone who dared to harm what remained of those he held dear. His eyes gleamed with a deadly intent as he made his silent vow. Yugiljan had lost too much. He would not lose again.